So I'll kick it off myself. I'm Lauren Fay. I run a small nonprofit called the New Fashion Initiative, and we work to raise awareness for Americans about the social and environmental impact of fashion. And I came here by way of a few different careers, but I'd always loved fashion and decided a couple of years ago to really follow what I care about and to live a little bit more in line with my values. So I made a career switch from IT into this space. So.
Thanks. My name is Deborah Drew. I'm a research associate with the World Resources Institute. I started actually looking at sustainable development, and I got my master's in conflict resolution, and then took that at the nexus of environment, conflict and social development, and business, so looking at corporate social responsibility issues. Then moved on after grad school and went to work for the Alliance for Bangladesh Worker Safety, which is a nonprofit with corporate members that are looking at, mostly in Dhaka, factory safety standards after the Rana Plaza disaster. So then from there I moved on, worked on climate issues at World Resources Institute, including apparel and sustainable supply chains and sustainable business models.
Hi everyone, I'm Maxine Beda. I got into this by way of human rights law, into Zadie, which is a sustainable fashion company, and then from that decided that in order to really change the industry, we couldn't do it through just a brand, and so kind of from that started a nonprofit organization called the New Standard Institute, which is looking kind of at a systems level, what are the things that need to change within the industry so we can turn it into a force for good instead of what it currently is right now. And a proud Barnard alum. 01? Oh, BC 05. There we go.
Yeah.
2005. Started 2005.
So I asked because, hi, I'm Josie DaCosta Johnson, class of 96.
Nice.
And I came to this in a very layman's way. I'm a born and raised New Yorker from 139th and Riverside. I was raised in church sales, vintage, consignment, and thrift. And going to private schools, I was very clear what kind of brands I needed to wear to be presentable and feel a certain way. And so that's how I got into fashion. While I was at Barnard studying anthropology and continuing my scholarship program at Alvin Ailey, I started interning at Essence Magazine in the fashion department. And so while I was building my dance career and my writing career, I was also building my fashion career. I now am part owner of a store in Brooklyn called Radical Woman, where we're independent designers and artists, and we also do vintage resale and vintage fashion styling workshops. And I think it's, for me, I was here today doing the workshop on how to thrift really well and how to look at thrift as a high fashion endeavor and as a generationally sustainable thing where you can not just look great but also feel pride in the lineage that your clothes had. And as a New Yorker and an American who comes with the progeny of not really knowing my lineage completely, that's what brought me to this path. I think it's really important to create lineage through clothes as well so that we can have the sustainability of the way that we treat material things also reflect in how we're treating each other as human beings.
Hi everybody, I'm Calixto. I coming from technology in a corporate career, and a few years ago I decided to go back to school for fashion design. And as every fashion designer, I wanted to have my own clothing line and work with brand new materials. And through my education, I realized that there are so many clothes out there already, and the waste is big. So also during my education, I started to practice haute couture and tailoring. I work in Europe, and I realized that in order to have those beautiful garments that we see in the runway, we also waste a lot of materials. So as part of my thesis, when I graduated, I focused on repair, renew, and transforming second-hand and vintage, and use all those materials for haute couture, and really make pieces that are completely different and give a second life to those materials that are basically going to be wasted or people are not going to wear anymore. So I'm based in New York. I have a fashion studio in the West Village where we work directly with private clients, and basically we work on taking away the preconceived idea that resale or secondhand clothes are for thrifting or for basically giving away or not looking at them as really high fashion items. So that's my mission, and that's what I'm here, and that's why it was really a privilege today to work with all the students in this challenge, and we will see the outcome later today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lara Guzik. I currently work in marketing and customer acquisition at Hum, which is a peer-to-peer fashion rental company. And our mission is really to allow women to dress, invest, and spend smarter. Mackenzie, who's the founder of Hum, is from Australia, and growing up, she really started looking at her closet as being an investment and being assets. So she and her girlfriends were every weekend renting and lending items to one another and making upwards of like $500 a week just renting out their clothing. So she, once she kind of like developed that idea, said, I'm going to bring this model to the US. So we're currently pre-launch. We're launching it in New York in the next 2 months or so. And we're really trying to build a vibrant community of women who care about being socially responsible, who care about being fiscally responsible, but also want to look and feel fabulous while they're also aligning with their values. So that's what brings me here. I am also a first-year business student over at Columbia Business School. So I'm there. I'm studying marketing, entrepreneurship, and retail, and interning with Hum concurrently.
Great, welcome. I think we have a great mix, a great group. I'm excited to dive in. I think we can all acknowledge the universal importance of this topic. We all are obviously wearing clothing up here in front of all of you, and as are you. So we want to talk about a little bit about, I think some of you had mentioned, personal attachment to clothing, so self-identification, presentation, branding, things of that nature. How do you think, and I'll start with you, Jossie. What do you think how does that personal connection to clothing translate into larger conversations about people and planet? You sort of hinted to it, some of the social layers to it, but I'd love for you to expound on that a bit.
Okay, so I guess being from the city and knowing that you can go into different neighborhoods and have to code switch with language, I also learned how to code switch with clothes. And having toured as a dancer with predominantly white companies, being the only black person, I was very clear after, the same way I was as a child, that however I was dressing the book did affect how people were going to treat me, regardless of what came out of the cover, And so it's an empowering thing for me. I lived in Italy for 7 years. It's also where I gained a love for resourcing leather from Coach. I would use their leathers to start my bag line. And I realized how differently I was treated based on the perception of how much I spent on my clothes. And it's a great trick because it's empowering. Because I'm like, it was $1. I got into a club in Milan.
Yeah, sure.
Because of a bag that they thought was real and it wasn't, And so those kind of things, I've been able to take the trauma of being treated inhumanely,
right,
and turn it into a position of power, because I already know the equation in someone's mind of you have a Marc Jacobs hat on, you have a fur on, so therefore you must be okay. Meanwhile, I got this at Tokyo 7 for $20, and this is my grandmother's. So for me, that's how I approach it, and it does align with what I do feel. Having traveled and been away from New York for 10 years, I came back with my daughter, and I do feel like my city is a wonderful and painful reflection of the macrocosm of the world. I see the inhumanity. I see, this city used to have codes where if you bumped shoulders, that was asking for a fight. Now I bet you all get bumped every day, constantly, nobody says anything. And it's really interesting. So I feel like the fact that we're not looking at each other we're not looking at what we're wearing, we're not looking at our eyes, we're not interacting in that way. It makes us devalue how we dress, makes us devalue how we feel, and then also we overvalue what people put on based on the trends and, you know, the relationship of our fashion to money. So I think that for me, it's about separating that.
Yeah, and Lara, I mean, it's interesting because the business model that you're, you know, focused on and you ladies are building is around sort of the signal of the, not just the acceptance of the shared economy, but a little bit, you know, also of the pride of that. So can you talk a little bit about that, about your sort of, your person, your community, and how you guys are going about building that?
Sure. So at Hum, we really believe that the way that you dress, the way that you present yourself, shows the world who you are, shows the world who you aspire to be. Women, on average, have 28 special occasions a year. That could be a birthday brunch, that could be, you know, a night out at Lincoln Center if you're feeling cultural. You know, you have these moribund types of events that go on, and for each one of those, you want to feel beautiful, you want to feel special, you want to feel empowered. At the same time, you have bills, you have student loans, you have priorities that are competing with spending, you know, all of your discretionary income on clothes. And at the same time, you know, we're at this pretty interesting inflection point in retail in that consumers are becoming more educated, we're becoming smarter about what we're wearing, about the brands that are producing these items, and it's a very interesting time because we can kind of take back the power, and a mechanism for doing that is to elongate the lifetime of our clothing. So I can invest in something, I can spend, you know, a couple $100 more than I thought I would on a specific item, but I can also know that I'm going to make dividends on that, you know, next year, 2 years from now, by lending and renting and all of that. So it's really, it's a foundation of empowerment and of allowing women as a community to really raise one another up so that we can achieve that.
Great. I think that's exciting. I think the cool quotient of, you know, the capsule collection and the idea, something that's embraced, I think, more in Europe is, you know, having a smaller amount of clothing and wearing things on repeat. And I think things like, you know, whether it's the royal family or there's definitely a lot of, there's a larger cultural shift where re-wearing things is getting more accepted in the US, which is exciting because that's a lead into the impact of clothing, which, you know, a lot of people don't think about in terms of how the industry itself affects people and planet. So, Deb, I want to ask you, with your experience at the World Resource Center, the, you know, textiles, and if you could give us a little bit more information about the impact of textiles on the communities. Most of them are made overseas. So if you could maybe give us some context about that issue and the intricacies of the problem.
Sure, yeah. I think, I have my computer here because I have some blogs and stuff that I'm using as a reminder of some of these stats. But where I work, we're not apparel experts. I just want to put that out there. We are looking at business model innovation and how to address unsustainable consumption going forward with the growing middle class globally. And we did a paper, Elephant in the Boardroom, looking at unsustainable consumption and how the need to address that. And apparel was one of the topics that we looked at. Also looked at cars and beef, but apparel consumption really caught some people's attention, and it looked at how do we meet growing demand. There's going to be 3 billion more middle class entering globally, most in Asia. And then we also have the continued high consumption in current high consumption economies like the US, Europe. And so how do you shift those models, and how do you help emerging economies leapfrog some of the unsustainable habits that we have here? So that was the background. It's why we looked at that paper. One of the really surprising things about apparel was the drastic impact that it does have. One thing that I would urge the apparel industry at large, I say this all the time, is more transparency in the volume of production. Those numbers are still not really out there, they're not public, so trying to understand what baseline we're at is the first step to making those changes. So some pretty big things. There's, like you mentioned, most of the production happens in emerging economies where living wages are not paid largely, and most of those workers are women. So there's a lot of skirting labor laws by hiring either informal or homebound workers, so they don't have the safety of laws. There's also this practice of hiring workers for just under the amount of time, like 6 months, so they don't have to then enter into they don't meet those next labor standards of laws. So there's a lot of that turnover in trying to skirt some of those systems to keep wages low. One of the environmental impacts is the amount of water that is used. Some estimates put it at about a fifth of industrial water pollution is from apparel production, and that's every year. So I think looking at these different impacts of what we have, there's also GHGs with greenhouse gas emissions with polyester and other synthetics, which are oil-based, and so then you have about 200 years to decompose in a landfill if a shirt is just thrown away. Then you have a very thirsty natural product or fiber like cotton, which is responsible for a lot of irrigation issues and a lot of water withdrawal issues and freshwater consumption. So I think that being very conscious about some of these materials that we use and their different impacts, not that you shouldn't wear clothes, but just I think the turnover in the micro seasons really makes this sort of just plethora of clothing really, it's pretty stark how much we're consuming with that. And so I think we wanted to approach it with new business models to meet growing demand in a different way. So not in a linear making something, taking resources, making something and throwing it away, which is the take, make, waste, or linear model. So we're looking to decouple growth from that model.
Great. So I'm just going to ask Maxine, just to, as someone who, went through creating a brand and building a brand and sourcing properly and being transparent about your supply chain, I'm sure you saw the way to do things the right way, but I'm sure you also saw and know of a lot of people who aren't. So just for you to maybe add a little bit about your experience working in that space of the challenges of still putting out a sustainable brand, because I know we still have a lot of people in the U.S. who are looking for deals, who are looking, and that's based on real economic pressures and constraints. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about the cause and effect of building a brand like that, in terms of how the costs were reflected in some of the pricing.
Cost of living?
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how to answer that question. I think how this might be answering your question, but we've come to clothing at such a time where the idea that a t-shirt costs $5 is like considered normal, and therefore spending more on that seems like, why would I do that when I could just buy something for $5? And I grew up at a time before fashion was that cheap, where you actually felt it. Like, going back to school was the only real time that I was able to buy new clothes. Like, that was, it was an investment, and you felt that, and you knew that this was something that was going to be in your closet for a long time. So you wanted to invest both your money, but also your time in thinking about what that clothing meant to you and what it was saying about yourself. And I think that as a new generation has come in, when clothing has been so cheap, that investment has disappeared, and I think at a loss almost for fashion in a way, because people don't even have to really think, is this something I really love because it's going to cost me a lot of money? They're just like, oh, this is the same as the Starbucks I just bought, so I don't really even have to know or think about whether I like it or not. So in building a sustainable fashion company, that was a lot of what we focused on, was just how recalibrating people's expectations of what something should cost, and that also recalibrating the notion that if the ticket price is low, that it means it's a good deal. Because what is surprising is if you go into a fast fashion store, for example, and you just look at the clothing properly and like look inside out and look at the seams, it is shocking just to see how much is already falling apart. And I didn't come at this originally from a sustainable like fashion angle. I was a very happy like fast fashion shopper when I first came to Barnard. But it was, I had a moment looking at my closet like when I was in law school across the street, and going to the law firm and like trying to present this adult like professional persona, again thinking about like what the clothing reflects about us, and I stared at this like closet, tiny closet, but like overflowing with clothing. I'm like, why do I have nothing to wear? I have all this stuff, it's like flowing everywhere, and none of it really connects with me. And I think it was that fast fashion kind of obsession and where I got lost with like, what does the ticket price actually mean? And so in building a fashion company, that's really what we focused on, is just like quality materials, something that you're gonna wanna wear time and time again, and something you could feel good about. And there's always that conversation about like, from the consumer side, can I afford this? And I think the answer to that is like, if you rejigger your mindset in terms of cost per wear, that ultimately completely changes just the numbers around clothing. And then on the brand side, there have been studies done about what it would cost to pay a living wage to garment workers, and it is not like ludicrously expensive. It's not going from a t-shirt that costs $5 to a t-shirt that's going to cost $500. It's like pennies that would need to be added to a garment to pay a living wage. It's just the pressure hasn't been there yet. And so I think what maybe you're touching on a little bit is there's a problem within the sustainable space generally, like whether it's related to food or to clothing, that sustainable is equated with luxury, and I think that that's a problem. It doesn't have to be something that is necessarily more expensive. It has to be more expensive than like a $5 t-shirt, but it doesn't have to be a luxury item in terms of a price tag. There is that middle ground, and you can make a product very nicely with good materials at a reasonable cost. That's a long-winded way of
No,
answering
that's a great, totally. I think, so that leads me to the next question that I have, which is about circularity. So just to kind of defining that and having maybe, I think it's interesting to maybe have, actually, Maxine, for you to continue to tell us about what you think, that circular model, because I know you're looking at the new institute that you're putting together, you're looking at having a house for really all the data, because I think another I would say challenge the sustainable fashion world has is that there also are a lot of statistics that are mentioned and repeated that aren't necessarily rooted in data. They're not data driven. So, for example, a lot of people here have probably heard that fashion is the second most polluting industry, which is actually not. It's an oft repeated, not verified statistic. So if you could maybe give us a little bit of, just talk about circular fashion, about what is meant by that phrase, and then and maybe a little bit about the impact of the potential upswing for changes like that, making a more circular model.
Yeah, I might say something controversial that
Please,
the other
bring it.
panel.
Right? Are we ready? We're
Well,
ready.
no, I mean, circularity has become this like major buzzword, I think, in this space, and with everybody jumping on board. And I think at the root of it, and probably everybody on this panel, given what I know and have heard from everybody, I think is rooted in the right path, which is, I think, how the World Resources Institute is thinking about it, that, we have to move away from models of just wearing your clothing a few times and then getting rid of it. And I think the problem, so I'll just first define the circularity as you already described, Deborah, moving from what is it? It's the nice buzzword. Make waste, to having something that could be like reused again. However, the problem with kind of jumping to like let's reuse this again is that in the apparel space, clothing is not easily, the textile itself can't easily be recycled, and I think there are fast fashion players that are really pushing terms like circularity so that they don't actually have to address their fundamental business model, which is one of wearing only a few times. So my kind of pushback on how circularity, which has kind of become, at least in the sustainable circles, to mean recyclability, my pushback is like, the technology to actually do that is not there. And meanwhile, we're pushing, even the city announced a big take-back program, recycling program for textiles, but there isn't yet the capacity to recycle those materials. Like, for example, there isn't the capacity, if you check your clothing tags right now, I'm sure a lot of you are wearing like mixed fibers. That can't be recycled. And even non-mixed mixed fibers. I was recently in China, and I was invited to go see this like great, amazing innovation, and it was an AI. They were using computers to help speed up recycling, and the AI was supposed to be able to read the color of a swatch of fabric and sort it out, and that was the major innovation. And I was like, yay, so cool, in theory. And then I was looking at it and I was like, that's weird. I saw all of the swatches and it was all going into a green bucket. And I was like, they're not all green. So I said, I didn't want to be, I was like, I think your machine is colorblind. Like, that was, the whole purpose of it was to sort the color. And they're not even like, just goes to show the industry is so far removed from being able to recycle even 100% pure like fiber of one variety in one color. And so I think before we get to the Shangri-La of circularity, we need to slow down and think about the larger challenge of slowing consumption generally, and while at the same time pushing for innovations in this space. But if it's a myth that if you drop off your clothing at a donation or recycling center, that it's going to be magically turned into another product. That's just like not what's happening.
Yeah, go ahead.
Add something really, it's another whole other side of circularity that's related to the question before. I think another aspect of this word that I'm hearing overused, I like to think of it in somehow as generational, but then I also recognize that I did grow up in a much more circular economy because communities were more involved with each other. Mm-hmm. So we had this thing where like, we would use clothes, it would go to my cousin would take it, it would go to the little one, it would go to and I did that with my daughter. I have an 8-year-old daughter, and that's another reason why I'm in this, when I started making bags, because I hated diaper bags. And I started cloth diapering and finding consignment shops for babies, and also doing education in my community about reselling cloth diapers too. Like, I made a big business reselling cloth G diapers. And it's baffling that once people think it's a novel thing, they get on it. But meanwhile, that's how we've survived as generations of families and communities. And that's why I know some of my neighbors, because we'd pass each other jeans. And now, I gentrified my neighborhood in Brooklyn 20 years ago, I feel. And neighbors don't speak to each other anymore. So it starts with that, like I said, how are we functioning as humans? And then how does that relate to our food? And how does that relate to our clothes? Because it could be more circular if we had more community.
Yeah. And I think also it's about awareness. And most of the people, when they see a skirt, they see a skirt. But when you ask them to see, can you see a big piece of yarn that you can transform into a pair of pants, into a bag, into cover for your couch, into like even like clothing for your kitchen, then is when people start to kind of start thinking about. I've been working with towels, and one of my clients brought me 7 towels and say, I need a dress for a cocktail party, and say, well, let's do it. And it was amazing when she picked up the dress. She didn't believe it. And the thing is, it's more about, I think what we need to start to educate people is not about the brand, because everybody right now has access to different brands, either like fast fashion or very high-end. It's more about what it's saying about me and how can I wear this differently. That is one. And the other aspect is definitely the economic forces are there. I mean, we are going from a $2 billion resale industry to almost 4.5 billion in just 18 months.
Yeah.
And it's growing 70% year over year.
Yeah.
So when we think about sharing, reselling, and basically transforming clothing, this is the time. So also I do think that brands are adapting, and we see with H&M, Zara, Levi's, all adopting different types of transforming, mending, repairing their clothes. But what we see from the consumer standpoint, they are repairing themselves.
Right.
They are transforming themselves. And I do think that more and more people are starting to make conscious about, if I donate this t-shirt, basically I'm doing a bad service to the environment and to society, because at the end of the day, that t-shirt probably is going to be in a third world country
Right.
that is going to be basically changing or transforming their own economic system, meaning taking tailored seamstresses and textile industry from those countries, and they really need the jobs.
Right.
So, and the other part is not about only third-party countries, it's about New York City. I mean, when we think about our textile and fashion industry here, we have people who are making less than $15 an hour, working, sewing, making dresses that are going to be sold for $80,000. So I think it's about how can we make impact locally,
Right.
and start to thinking about educating and creating awareness outside of our space.
Yeah, I just love to circular economy.
Please, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's, absolutely right, is that circularity has sort of meant recyclability, not just in apparel, in everything. So I think truly circular economy is recognizing the value and bringing the value back into it, and decoupling business growth from raw material extraction. And we're not there yet. And so it's, I think, trying to come up with not only a definition of what circular economy means, and everyone can get on board with that and actually strive to it. I think we need to have pragmatic solutions and steps to get there, including in the apparel industry. With the informal economy is what you were that made me think of what you were talking about, is that the informal economy is actually much more circular than the formal economies for that very reason. There are plastic recycling, which is sent off somewhere else that it's picked up and then sold to recyclers. There's sharing of clothing, that all of those are much more circular than what the formal economy is able to put out there. And I think that we should strive to learn lessons from that and formalize a circular economy in a more systematic and holistic way. And also with the clothing that's recycled, it's not quite recycled, as we know. I think that even the fast fashion, all of those clothing that's out there, that's still not being worn to its full useful life. So we're throwing away even clothing that is not meant to be long-lasting. It's still not being worn as long as it should be. So I think slowing down everything and all of the consumption that we have, and being thoughtful about what we're buying and what we want to put ourselves and what that says about us is going to go a long way.
So-
I'm sorry,
Oh, no,
I
go
just
ahead.
want to add,
Yeah.
the last part is when we come together and we have these type of discussions, we definitely don't think about China and India, and at the end of the day, what our consumption is a very tiny piece of what they are consuming. So it's more about how can we come up with these other type of solutions that are also going to impact these emerging markets. and we can definitely work here in the US, but it's also about, do we have any other ways to impact China?
Right.
Do we have any other ways to train people, invite them to see what we are doing locally,
Right.
for them to export those ideas? So, yeah.
Yeah, because I think, well, to that point, we certainly still have a cultural influence on the world as the U.S., so this could be an incredible export to make it, to talk of circularity and all the potential that you have mentioned, whether it's, socioeconomic empowerment in terms of being able to participate and present as, potentially more than the cost of what you're wearing, or whether it's the bonding and community that can happen through mending, and the connectivity that can come out of that. So what I'd like to do, we're getting towards the end. I just would love to have everybody down the line speak a little bit to everybody here in the audience about what individuals can do. So that's, students, that's everyone, just some action items and some food for thought for people to be able to take with them and digest around this, that can, shift change now. Yeah, we'll go that way. I'll start with them. Yes.
I guess I'll start. So I actually think there are a number of things that are actionable and like you can do right now to be more mindful about how you're impacting the globe with your consumption of apparel and other items like that. I think one thing is that if you are buying things and continuing to consume things first, they should be things that you actually feel are an investment and feel that they are of high quality, that will ultimately increase their durability in your closet, but also they're going to be items that if you do resell, on the RealReal, for example, someone's going to want that piece. So being thoughtful about like the quality of items that you're purchasing. I also think the maintenance and the care that you're giving to your clothes that are in your closet is also really important. I know I have like way too many pairs of shoes that have are past the point of them being okay and getting mended, and being smart about when you do see that things are fraying, that things are getting in disrepair, to either bring it to a tailor, empower yourself to fix that item so that it has a longer lifespan. I also think there are these fabulous resources, just companies that are really feeding into and building off of the ethos of circularity. So whether that's a Rent the Runway, where you're renting items versus purchasing them. Little plug for Hum again, renting and lending from closets, women across New York and ultimately across the world. And then there are brands that are really embodying this ethos. So companies like Stella McCartney, she's really been a pioneer of sustainable fashion. Reformation, which may be a little more accessible to some of us. MetaWear, there's a cashmere company called Nadam. There's, if you do your research, and we have so much information at our fingertips, I mean, with Google now, in a second you can Google sustainable fashion brands and get, a plethora of information about who actually is engaging in good ethical practices. So I think really empowering yourself to do that extra bit of research, that extra bit of information to understand what the brand stands for and whether their materials, their work environments, their suppliers are a part of this, are going to do something that's good for the world and good for all of us.
So I think it's a great time to be thrifting and buying secondhand clothes. I mean, it's very fashionable. So for me, it's more about if you really care about clothing, it's the time for us to explore and to experiment with that. The second one is about trying to sell your clothes rather than just give it away. It sounds counterintuitive, but really, it's better for the environment and it's fair for the people who work in the industry. And second is really give a chance to the share economy. It's time for the share economy. There's nothing wrong with just renting a garment, give it back, and keep going with their lives.
So yeah, I agree about consignment. I'm really big on not just giving bags of clothes away to Salvation Army. Ladies, throw a swap. Get some fake Monopoly money. Tell your friends to bring 10 pieces each. They stand in front of you. They sell their piece. you make as much money, and then you can buy those great Coach shoes that your friend throws away because her feet grew or something. Swaps are amazing. You can have hors d'oeuvres, wine, and you can educate your friends about why you're doing it. So those are great things to do. Resale is big. Anyone with kids, anyone who knows kids, eBay, all of those 3 years of, baby shower gifts away, make some money off it, be an entrepreneur. Consignment, I've walked into stores and never had to put down money because you keep consigning over months and then you get money back. So that's a good way to not just throw clothes into the ether. Try buying just one piece when you go into a thrift store. If you have a $50 budget, try buying just one piece instead of several pieces. That piece you might remember more. Cloth diaper, hybrid diaper, tell everybody about it. 200 years, that's a really strong word. So many things take 200 years to biodegrade, and none of us are gonna live that long. And as a New Yorker, please explore New York. Forget all these chain stores and all these international stores that have come here that were not here when I first started shopping. Explore the small stores, and you'll get the best deals and save the most money. And do what we're doing, just keep talking about it.
So I think what has been presented is a lot of really great options for what you as an individual can do. And I think what ends up getting lost in these conversations is that the power you have as a voter and the importance of policy in all of this. I think prior to the Green Deal coming out in discussion from that, the environment was something that we cared about, but we didn't vote on it. And politicians only create legislation around things that matter to their voters. And so I think seeing yourself as a citizen is something that's really important, and speaking to brands also, to speak to them, whether it's on Twitter or other social platforms, voicing your concerns and questions is a fabulous way to create a conversation and create a lot of impact that's beyond your own individual buying. So we can't forget about collective action when we're thinking about these real global challenges.
Okay, going last is, everyone said some great stuff. So mine was going to be vote. That was going to be my last thing. So vote, but also, and I think that the swap is a great idea. We actually did that at my work as well, and it was really successful. I think people came in. It was so fun. We had the conference room, had people. If you donated an item, you got to take an item. So it was 1 for 1. So that's really fun. If you have a place where you at work that you could organize something like that, it's worth exploring. And I think also just asking yourself the question, do I really need this? If you're buying a piece for a Halloween costume, a themed party, can you rent it? Can you borrow it? Just try to think of different ways to consume, and not just with clothing, with other aspects, with other things, with plastics, with just what do the things we actually need to go about our lives, and do it well. And whatever you consume, make sure it says what you want it to say about you.
Great. I'm just going to add really quickly it's a cobbler tip. So we're talking about walking around New York. You can put Vibram soles on the bottom of all shoes. You can put them on the bottom of heels. They do a great job extending the life of leather on the bottom of shoes. And then the last thing I would add is laundry. A lot of us wash in hot water, which is not necessary and beats the crap out of clothing, most fabrics. So big proponent of washing with cold water and air drying. So. And thank you so much, everybody. Great panel, great conversation.
Don't go anywhere, you guys, because what's going on? Can you bring them on? Hi, I'm Sandra Goldberg. Calixto is going to. You guys hear us? He's going to introduce our design teams from today. And our judges will give a little brief feedback, and then we'll award some prizes.
So we invited the students to take part of a challenge, a fashion challenge, in which they basically selected different pieces of the resold clothes, and they created their own designs based on specific concepts. They did an amazing job. They worked very hard. most of the afternoon. And I want to welcome on the stage next to their own creations. And I would definitely ask for a round of applause to these very hardworking designers.
So, I guess we'll just go in order. We'll just give a little brief feedback and then we'll announce the winners. Sound good? I feel like I'm right in the middle of the sideline. So this is Team Dustman, the team's name. And the word that they were building off of was balance. No, go.
I think you captured the essence of what balance means really beautifully. You talked about the balance between negativity and positivity in one's life. You talked about light versus darkness, different types of materials, and it was such a beautiful expression of that essence and of that truth. And I think maybe yes, another.
My favorite thing about your presentation was the first moment that you presented yourselves. You were both very clear about what you did, and you let us know who you were right away, and that really made me engage with your piece. I love that you took a very elegant approach to this challenge, but also still showed your construction and thoughtfulness, and the piece does show balance, so thank you for your articulation.
Yeah, I was really struck. Obviously, reusing items was the point here, but I really liked that you used shirts at the bottom to have a button up, and I liked that you allowed the shirt to stay an obvious shirt, but you took, like, the collar became, not a belt, but it became a waistline. And I thought that was, and the sleeve became a flower or an embellishment. And I thought that was really interesting use of repurposing something and still using its kind of core, what makes it a shirt. You repurposed that. I thought that was a really interesting way to go, and I thought it showed a lot of skill.
The second team here was Team Matt, is that your team? And their word was trust, which they really worked on mistrust.
Sure. I think this is just so fabulous. I know you said that this woman would be going to the Met Gala, and like if I was going to the Met Gala, I would 110% wear that. I would feel like just so empowered and so feminine yet chic, yet kind of also androgynous a little bit. Like it was such just beautifully articulated and beautifully conceived. I love the style. I love the whole package.
I want to compliment you on the silhouette. And again, my favorite part was your quick response to my question of where was she going, because you were very clear that she was going to the Met Gala, and I think that the thought process and behind your piece was very extensive, and so to hear just a very simple clarity in terms of what she was giving, I think was great. Thank you.
I really liked how you presented you can't have trust without mistrust, because without one, there is no other. I thought that was really well represented. And I really liked how you took the skirt and you made slits, and you had other materials and other items coming through and showing through that. I thought that was a really clever way to demonstrate trust.
And the third group was Team Thimble, and their word was power.
I love the tension and the duality between the leather and the hardware, coupled with the veil, the wedding veil, as well as I think there are other areas where you're integrating that kind of like lighter, more feminine material. I just think it speaks perfectly to the fact that institutions and things which used to be a source of disempowerment for women are now something that we're reclaiming and being able to be proud of and to wear as almost a shield and as armor. So I just, love it conceptually and think it was really well thought out and really packed a punch visually and emotionally.
I thought this piece, construction-wise, was highly impressive, given the time that you had. The mixed fabrics, the mixed textures, the attention to detail with the glasses and the harness, the past, present, future awareness, and also your awareness of the connotation of sexual power within feminine softness was really clear in this piece, and I appreciated that.
I really like looking at this one. I think it is, to me, it's very much an art piece as well. I think it stands on its own as a very powerful image. And I really like the Join Me addition that you had, because it shows the power of numbers as well as individual being powered. So I think it was good.
And lastly, I'd like to say that that's the costume that would be a good dance costume.
Thank you, guys. So this, the judges were looking for originality of the concept, response to the illumination of the prompt, craft. Is that one more picture?
Overall impression.
Right, that's like in figure skating, overall impression. So, and I will say, everybody always says this, but it was a very tight race. But in terms of the third team in was Team Math from Mistrust. Congratulations. Second place was Team Thimble with Power. And Team Dustin, everyone felt that you guys really brought it in a lot of ways in all of the areas and managed to walk in great feat with your balancing act. Congratulations. I just wanted to say before everyone goes, first of all, thank you so much to this amazing panel, and Jassy and Calixto who were here the whole day lending their energy and their wisdom, and then also had to be articulate in front of the group. And I love the breadth of perspective you guys bring. And I want to thank you guys, the students, for bringing your creativity and your openness. And I feel like what I heard tonight from you guys in terms of these action, right, we're all facing some major problems, and it's not just about clothing, when we're looking at the environment. And what I heard here was, think about what you're doing on an individual level, look in your community and see what you can do as a community. I heard from Deb to take it to your workplace. I heard from Maxine and Deb and I think everybody to take it to the voting booth twice, apparently. And I think that's one of the things we were trying to do today, is to show how rethinking ultimately the value of what we have. That's what everything here is about, is finding value, finding beauty, finding meaning in the things that we're blessed with, whether it's clothing or the planet or so many things. So I hope that you all had fun, and I want to thank you for coming. And another round of applause for our